The Duke of Warrington arrived at Ashworth Hall on a grey afternoon, his carriage wheels grinding the gravel with a sound like grinding teeth. He did not admire the symmetrical hedgerows or the ornamental lake. He had come with the efficiency of a man conducting a business transaction, and his business was marriage. The Earl of Ashworth received him in the drawing room, a man whose fortunes had dwindled while his pride remained plump. Two daughters sat upon the settee like pearls arranged on velvet. Miss Margaret Ashworth, the eldest, golden-haired and serene, inclined her head with practiced grace. Miss Catherine Ashworth, the middle daughter, possessed a sharper beauty and a smile that did not falter. Both had been prepared. Both understood the stakes. The Duke stood before the hearth, his silhouette imposing against the marble mantel. He was tall, dark-haired, with features that might have been carved by a sculptor who valued precision over warmth. His coat was superfine, his boots gleaming, his expression unreadable. "My lord," the Earl began, "may I present my daughters, Margaret Catherine, His Grace the Duke of Warrington." The sisters curtsied. The Duke inclined his head a fraction. He did not comment on their gowns or their accomplishments. He had no taste for flattery. "You have marriageable daughters," the Duke said, his voice a low baritone that filled the room without effort. "I require a wife. An heir is necessary. I have no sentimental requirements. She must be well-bred, healthy, and capable of managing a ducal household. I see two suitable candidates before me. I shall marry whichever daughter you deem best suited, my lord. The choice is yours." The Earl's mouth opened, then closed. A flush of pleasure crept up his collar. To be handed such power, he could already feel the weight of Warrington's coin in his accounts. Margaret and Catherine exchanged a glance that contained no small amount of ambition. "Your Grace is most generous," the Earl managed. "I am certain either of my elder daughters would make a splendid duchess. We might discuss their respective virtues." The door at the far end of the drawing room swung open. The Duke's gaze shifted, and the words halted in his throat. She entered as if the wind had carried her in from the fields. Her riding habit was a dark moss green, speckled with mud along the hem. Her hair, a deep chestnut, had escaped its pins and tumbled in unruly waves past her shoulders. In one gloved hand she carried a battered book, her finger marking a page. She stopped when she saw the assembly, her cheeks flushed from exertion, her eyes, gray as winter sea, sweeping the room with frank surprise. Helena Ashworth, the youngest daughter, had not meant to interrupt. She had been riding across the North Meadow, chasing the horizon until her mare was lathered and her lungs burned. She had forgotten the hour entirely. "Forgive me," she said, her voice clear and unhurried. She did not stammer. She did not sink into a penitent curtsy. She simply stood there, rooted in her own unruliness, as if drawing rooms and dukes were incidental to her existence. The Earl's expression curdled. "Helena, we have a guest. You were expected to be present." "I was not informed," Helena replied, and her gaze met the Duke. It lasted only a moment, that meeting of eyes, but it held. He saw no coyness, no calculation. She looked at him as if he were merely a man, not a title, not a fortune. It was so unfamiliar that he felt stripped. "Your youngest daughter," the Duke said, his voice quieter now. "You did not mention her." "She is not yet out," the Countess interjected quickly, her smile strained. "Still a girl." "I am 20, Helena said, and there was no petulance in it, merely a statement of fact. She walked to a side table and set down her book, then turned to face them. "I have been out, Mother. I simply find the season tedious." Margaret's lips tightened. Catherine studied her younger sister with something between envy and confusion. The Duke did not look away from Helena. He felt a strange pull, an irritation that was not irritation at all. "You ride unaccompanied?" he asked. "My mare is excellent company," Helena said. "She does not talk of the weather or the price of silk." A sound escaped the Duke, not a laugh but something close. He suppressed it swiftly. The Earl looked horrified. The Countess looked as if she might faint. "I shall leave you to your discussion," Helena added, and she curtsied properly this time. A brief, dignified dip, and walked out of the room, her muddy boots leaving faint impressions on the carpet. Silence stretched. The Duke found himself staring at the closed door. The proposition he had delivered moments before now tasted like dust in his mouth. He had said he would marry any daughter the Earl chose, and the Earl would choose either Margaret or Catherine. But the Duke's thoughts would not stray from the youngest, the one who had not simpered, who had not been presented, who had walked in late and upended his certainty without effort. "I shall call again tomorrow," he said abruptly. The Earl brightened. "Of course, Your Grace, we shall prepare." "I trust all your daughters will be present," the Duke added, his tone brooking no argument. He departed Ashworth Hall with his mind in turmoil. He told himself it was merely curiosity. A man of his station did not chase after impertinent girls with wind-blown hair and gray eyes that saw too clearly. He needed a wife, not a puzzle. But as his carriage rumbled down the drive, he realized he had not truly looked at either Margaret or Catherine. He could not recall the color of their eyes. He could, however, describe the exact shade of Helena. Part 2. The Unwilling Debutante. 3 days passed before the Duke's return. Ashworth Hall hummed with anticipation. The Earl had ordered fresh flowers in every vase. The Countess had drilled Margaret and Catherine on their accomplishments. A harp stood polished in the music room. A selection of watercolors had been artfully arranged. Helena observed these preparations with the detachment of a naturalist watching a curious species. She had no intention of performing. The morning of the Duke's visit, she retreated to the library, a room the rest of her family ignored. Dust motes floated in the slanting light. The scent of old leather and paper wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. She was seated in the window embrasure, a volume of agricultural treatises open on her lap when the door opened. She expected a servant. Instead, the Duke of Warrington stood on the threshold. He was alone. No footman, no hovering earl. He had sought her out, and the knowledge sent a thread of unease through her composure. "Your Grace," she closed the book but did not rise. "The receiving rooms are in the east wing." "I am aware." He stepped inside, his presence consuming the small space. "I asked after you. Your mother directed me here, though she seemed distressed by the request." "My mother believes a library is no place for a lady." Helena set the book aside. "She fears I shall develop opinions." The Duke's mouth twitched. "Have you?" "Opinions? Several. They are considered quite unfashionable." He moved closer, stopping before the window. The light caught the silver threading in his waistcoat. "You disapprove of my proposition." Helena met his gaze steadily. "I find it reductive, Your Grace. You wish to marry a daughter of this house as if selecting a breeding mare. You do not require a wife. You require a function. That is not the same thing." A muscle flickered in his jaw. "You speak boldly." "I speak honestly. You arrived and declared yourself indifferent to which woman became your duchess. Does that not strike you as insulting? To my sisters, to any woman. We are not interchangeable ornaments." The Duke was silent. In the distance, a maid's laughter echoed through the corridors. He had never been spoken to this way, not by a woman, not by anyone. It should have angered him. Instead, it unsettled something long calcified in his chest. "And if I had chosen you," he asked quietly, "would you have accepted?" Helena's expression did not waver. "I would have refused. I will not be a placeholder for a role any woman could fill. I would sooner marry a man who loves me or marry no one at all." The words landed like stones in still water. He wanted to dismiss them as girlish idealism. He could not. There was steel beneath her calm. The door opened again, and Julian Croft entered with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to welcome. He was fair-haired, with a smile that disarmed and a coat that, while well-cut, showed signs of careful mending. He stopped when he saw the Duke, his smile sharpening. "Your Grace, I did not expect to find you here." Croft's gaze moved to Helena, softening. "Miss Helena, I brought the volume of sonnets I promised, though I see you are occupied." "Mr." "Croft," Helena said warmly, and the Duke noted the difference in her tone, the genuine pleasure, the lack of guardedness. "You are always welcome. His Grace was just leaving." The dismissal was deft. The Duke had no choice but to incline his head and withdraw, though every instinct demanded he stay. As he passed Croft, their eyes met, a brief clash of steel beneath pleasantry. In the corridor, the Duke paused. He heard Croft's low laugh, Helena's answering murmur. Something hot and unfamiliar coiled in his gut. He recognized it as jealousy, and the recognition appalled him. That evening, he announced his intention to host a ball at Warrington Chase, his principal estate. Invitations would be sent to the Ashworths and the neighboring gentry. Ostensibly, it was a social gesture. Privately, the Duke knew he was setting a stage, and for the first time in years, the outcome mattered. Helena received the news with dismay. She understood the ball's purpose, a display, a competition. She told her mother she would not attend. The Countess wept. The Earl thundered. In the end, duty prevailed. She would go, but she would not preen. The Duke, alone in his study that night, stared at a miniature portrait on his desk, a woman with dark hair and a wistful smile, long dead. He had loved her once before consumption had taken her. Since then, marriage had seemed a transaction, a necessity stripped of feeling. Yet Helena's words echoed in his mind, "I will not be a placeholder." He did not know what he wanted anymore. He only knew he could not stop thinking about the youngest daughter, the one who had walked in late and refused to be ignored. Part 3. A Dance of Defiance. Warrington Chase blazed with candlelight. Carriages lined the drive like a string of black pearls, disgorging silk-clad ladies and gentlemen in satin breeches. The ballroom, with its soaring frescoed ceiling and towering mirrors, was a masterpiece of opulence. The Duke stood at its center, greeting guests with mechanical civility, his attention divided. The Ashworths arrived in a flutter of nervous excitement. Margaret wore pale blue, her hair dressed with seed pearls. Catherine wore rose pink, her smile brilliant and practiced. They moved into the crowd like ships launched on favorable tides. Helena entered last. Her gown was the color of storm clouds, a silvery gray devoid of ruffles or excessive trim. A single strand of garnets encircled her throat. Her hair was simply dressed, and she wore no feathers, no flounces. In a sea of peacocks, she was a sparrow, and yet the Duke could not look away. The dancing commenced. He led Margaret through a quadrille, her conversation a stream of carefully rehearsed compliments. He danced a minuet with Catherine, who laughed at his every remark. They were lovely, accomplished, everything a duchess should be. He felt nothing. Then he saw her. Helena stood near the terrace doors, speaking with Julian Croft. Croft's head was bent toward her, his posture intimate. Helena was smiling, a genuine smile that lit her gray eyes to silver. The Duke's hand tightened on his wine glass. He crossed the ballroom, the crowd parting before him like water before a prow. "Miss Helena, I believe the next dance is mine." It was not a question. Croft stiffened. Helena's smile faded, replaced by polite composure. "I do not recall reserving it, Your Grace." "I am reserving it now." She could not refuse without causing a scene. She placed her hand on his arm and he led her to the floor. The orchestra struck a waltz, scandalous in its intimacy. His hand settled on her waist. Her fingers rested on his shoulder. They began to move. "You avoid me," he said, his voice low. "You observe correctly." "Why?" She turned beneath his arm, her movements fluid. "Because you are accustomed to women who seek your attention. I do not. It confuses you, and confusion makes you persistent." His grip on her waist tightened fractionally. "You think you understand me. I think you are a man who has never been denied. It is not understanding. It is simple observation." They swept past a cluster of dowagers, whose fans fluttered like agitated wings. The Duke's expression was unreadable, but his pulse beat a rhythm of frustration and something deeper. "I told you I always obtain what I desire," he said, his breath warm near her temple. Helena lifted her chin. And I told you, Your Grace, that you cannot have me. I will not be chosen by default. I will not be your convenient arrangement. The music was ending. She released him a beat before the final note, stepping back. Thank you for the dance. She walked away, leaving him on the floor, the eyes of the ton upon him. Whispers erupted. Lady Jersey raised her quizzing glass. The Earl of Ashworth looked apoplectic. Margaret and Catherine stared, their expressions a blend of confusion and dawning realization. Julian Croft intercepted Helena at the terrace doors. Are you well? Perfectly, Helena said, though her hands trembled. She had done it publicly, irrevocably. She had refused the Duke of Warrington, and the cost would be high. Croft offered his arm. Walk with me. The gardens are lit with lanterns, let them talk. She took his arm, and they stepped into the cool night air. Inside the ballroom, the Duke stood motionless. He had been publicly humiliated. His pride demanded he retaliate, withdraw, find another family. But his mind replayed her words, the fire in her gray eyes. She had not been cruel. She had been truthful. For the first time, he saw himself through her eyes. A man who had reduced marriage to a transaction, who had forgotten that a wife was a person, not a function. The realization was bitter. He set down his glass and moved toward the terrace, but Julian Croft was already returning with Helena on his arm, her composure restored. She did not look at the Duke. She did not need to. The Duke understood then that he had lost something he had not known he wanted, and that winning it back would require more than wealth and titles. It would require becoming a man she could respect. Part 4. The Family's Pressure. The journey back to Ashworth Hall was a torture of silence. The Earl's fury filled the carriage like smoke. The Countess dabbed her eyes. Margaret and Catherine sat rigid, their dreams of ducal coronets in ruins. Helena stared out the window at the dark countryside, her own reflection a ghost in the glass. In the entrance hall, the Earl erupted. You have destroyed everything. The Duke showed us favor beyond imagining, and you publicly scorned him. What do you think will happen now? No suitor of consequence will come near this family. I did not seek his favor, Helena said quietly. He announced he would marry any daughter you chose. I was not among those presented. I merely refused to become a pawn in a game I did not agree to play. The Countess sobbed. After all we sacrificed, your season, your gowns, to be thrown away on pride. It is not pride, mother, it is principle. The Earl's voice was ice. You will go to your room. You will remain there until I decide what is to be done with you. Helena ascended the stairs without argument. Her heart ached, not for herself, but for the knowledge that her family valued ambition over her happiness. She had always known it, but the confirmation was a cold weight in her chest. She was reading by candlelight when a soft knock came at her door. Not a servant. The rhythm was hesitant. She opened it to find Margaret, her eldest sister's face pale in the corridor gloom. I am not supposed to speak with you, Margaret whispered, but I wanted to say what you did took courage. I could not have done it. You wanted the match, Helena said without accusation. I wanted what Mother wanted. Margaret's voice was small. I do not know what I want, you always have. That is the difference. She slipped away before Helena could reply. The next morning a visitor arrived. Not the Duke, Julian Croft. He was shown into the morning room and Helena was summoned. The Earl, still seething, allowed the meeting. Perhaps hopping Croft's interest might salvage something. Julian took her hand, his expression earnest. I know the situation is difficult. Your family is displeased. The ton will gossip, but I have admired you for a long time, Helena. I have little to offer. My estate is modest, my income uncertain. But I offer myself. Marry me. We could leave this behind. His words were a lifeline, a way out. She looked into his blue eyes and saw affection, genuine and warm. He was not the Duke. He did not dominate a room, but he was kind and he wanted her, specifically her. I am honored, she said slowly, but I need time. I will not leap from one cage to another without thought. Croft nodded, though disappointment flickered. "I will wait, my offer stands." He departed, and Helena stood at the window, watching his horse disappear down the drive. She was still there when a second horse approached, a magnificent black stallion she recognized, the Duke. He was received, though the atmosphere was brittle. He requested a private audience with Miss Helena. The Earl, smelling a second chance, consented. They walked in the garden between hedges of yew and roses past their bloom. The Duke was uncharacteristically silent. Finally, he stopped and faced her. "I owe you an apology," he said. Helena blinked. She had expected anger, recrimination, not this. "I made a public declaration that was thoughtless and reductive. You were right. A wife is not a piece of property to be selected." He paused, his jaw working. "I have not always been this way. Years ago, I loved a woman. She died before we could marry. I told myself I would never again allow emotion to govern my choices. I turned marriage into a business arrangement because it was safer." Helena listened, her expression unreadable. The vulnerability in his voice was raw, unpolished. She believed him. "That is a reason," she said, "but not an excuse." "I know." He met her eyes. "I am not asking you to accept me. I am asking for the opportunity to know you properly, not as a candidate for Duchess, but as a woman whose opinion I have come to value. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I am asking for a beginning." A thrush sang in the hedge. Helena felt the earth shift beneath her. She had been so certain of his arrogance, so prepared to dismiss him. Now he stood before her, stripped of pretension, and she saw the man beneath, flawed, grieving, trying. "I will consider it," she said at last, "but I make no promises." The Duke bowed his head. "That is more than I expected." He left, and Helena stood alone in the garden, the scent of damp earth rising around her. She thought of Julian Croft's offer, of her family's expectations, of the Duke's quiet confession. She had choices to make, but for the first time, she felt the power of her own agency like a steady flame in her chest. That evening, a maid brought a letter to her room. It was from the Duke, written in a strong, angular hand. It contained no declarations of passion, no demands. Instead, it spoke of his estate, his tenants, the view from his library window at dawn. He wrote as if sharing pieces of himself, quiet and unadorned. She read it 3 times. Then she lit a candle and burned it, watching the paper curl into ash. She was not ready to answer, but she was no longer certain of her refusal. Part 5. The Rival's Gambit. Julian Croft returned 2 days later, his expression more determined than before. He had spent the intervening hours contemplating his situation. The Ashworths were in disarray. The Duke's interest in Helena was obvious, and though she had not accepted him, Croft knew his own window was narrowing. He found Helena in the garden where she seemed to spend most of her mornings. She was seated on a stone bench, a book unopened on her lap. She looked up at his approach, and he saw the shadows beneath her eyes. "You have not slept," he said, sitting beside her. "I have been thinking." "Of me?" He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of many things, of what I want, what I am willing to accept." She turned to him. "Julian, you have been a true friend. I value that friendship deeply, but I cannot marry you merely to escape my circumstances. That would be unfair to us both." Croft's smile faded. "It is the Duke, then. He has won you over." "He has not won anything, but he has shown me a side I did not expect. I am not deciding between you. I am deciding what I want for myself." A flash of bitterness crossed Croft's face. "He is a Duke. I am a country gentleman with a leaking roof. The choice seems obvious." "If you believe I care about roofs," Helena said softly, "you do not know me at all." Before Croft could reply, a footman appeared on the path. "Miss Helena, His Grace the Duke of Warrington has arrived. He requests a moment of your time." Croft rose. "I will not compete with him in your drawing room. I have my pride." He strode away, and Helena felt a pang of regret. She had not meant to wound him, but honesty was a blade that cut both ways. The Duke awaited her in the morning room. He was not alone. The Earl hovered nearby, clearly hopping to witness a reconciliation. The Duke's expression was taut. "I came because I heard a rumor," the Duke said, his voice controlled. "That Mr. Croft has made you an offer of marriage and that you are considering it." Helena raised her chin. "I do not see how that is your concern." "It is my concern because he stopped, glanced at the Earl, then lowered his voice. "Because I cannot stand the thought of losing the chance you have given me." "I have given you no chance yet. I said I would consider your request. That is all." The Earl, unable to contain himself, burst out. "Helena, if the Duke is willing to overlook your disgraceful behavior, you must." "I must do nothing," Helena said, and her quiet steel silenced the room. "Father, you will leave us." It was not a request. The Earl, shocked, sputtered and retreated. Alone, the Duke took a step toward her. "You are the most infuriating woman I have ever encountered." "I shall take that as a compliment." His mouth curved, but the smile was fleeting. "Croft is a good man. I cannot fault him for seeing your worth. But I am asking you, not demanding, not expecting, to give me time. Weeks, months, however long you require. Let me show you that I can be more than the man who made that arrogant declaration." Helena studied him. The haughtiness was gone. In its place was something rawer, more uncertain. She had wanted him to earn the right to pursue her. Perhaps he was beginning to. "Very well," she said. "You may call on me, but I will not be rushed. I will not be managed, and I will not tolerate any further public spectacles." The Duke exhaled, a tension releasing from his shoulders. "You have my word." He left Ashworth Hall with a lighter step than he had entered it. That night, he sat in his study and wrote another letter, this one not for Helena but for himself, a private reckoning of his own transformation. He did not know if she would ever love him, but for the first time in a decade, he hoped. Helena, meanwhile, wrote a letter of her own to Julian Croft, thanking him for his friendship and gently but firmly closing the door on anything more. She would not string him along. She would not use him as a refuge. Her future, whatever it held, would be hers to build. Part 6. The Public Retraction. London's season was in full bloom, and the Tun's memory was long. Whispers of the Duke's humiliation at his own ball had circulated for weeks, embellished with every retelling. Some said Miss Helena Ashworth had laughed in his face. Others claimed she had fled the ballroom in tears. Few knew the truth, but all were eager for the next act. It came at a grand assembly hosted by the Marchioness of Bexley, a crushing affair of ostrich plumes and diamond aigrettes. The Ashworths attended, their presence a testament to the Earl's stubborn hope that his youngest daughter might yet repair the damage she had wrought. The Duke of Warrington arrived late, his entrance causing a perceptible shift in the room's attention. He moved through the crowd with purpose, his tall figure cutting a path to where the Ashworths stood. Helena saw him coming and braced herself. He stopped before her, but instead of speaking to her alone, he raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting with the clarity of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have a moment." The room quieted, fans paused, the Marchioness looked intrigued. "Some weeks ago, I made a statement that has been widely discussed. I said I would marry any daughter the Earl of Ashworth selected, as if a wife were merely an appointment to a post. That statement was arrogant, thoughtless, and untrue. I retract it fully." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Earl looked as if he might choke. Helena stood perfectly still. The Duke turned to face her directly. "Miss Helena Ashworth, I do not ask you to accept a proposal founded on convenience. I ask only if you would consider my suit, if you are willing, and only if you are willing. I do not seek a duchess. I seek you." The silence was deafening, every eye in the room fixed on Helena. Her sisters gaped. Her mother clutched her smelling salts. Helena felt the weight of 100 stares. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the night like she had done on horseback so many times, but she was done fleeing. She curtsied, a gesture of composure rather than submission. Your Grace, your words are appreciated. I require time to consider such a request. If your intentions are sincere, you will grant me that time. A collective intake of breath. She had not accepted, she had not swooned. She had, with quiet dignity, refused to be rushed, even in the face of a public declaration. The Duke bowed. You shall have all the time you desire. Helena turned and walked toward the terrace. The crowd parted for her, whispers swirling in her wake. She did not look back. Outside, the night air cooled her heated cheeks. She gripped the stone balustrade and breathed deeply. A few moments later, she heard footsteps. You followed me, she said without turning. I wanted to ensure you were well. The Duke stood a respectful distance away. I know I promised no more public spectacles. That was not a spectacle, it was a correction. I needed to undo the harm I caused with my first declaration. Helena turned to face him. The moonlight silvered his features, softening their severity. You meant what you said in there. Every word. She searched his face for artifice and found none. I do not trust easily. I have been managed and maneuvered by my family for years. I will not be managed by a husband. I would not want a wife I could manage, the Duke said. I would want a partner. The word hung between them. Partner, not possession, not function. Then prove it, Helena said. Not with grand gestures, not with public proclamations. With time, with honesty, with the small, unglamorous acts that show me who you are when no one is watching. The Duke nodded. I will call on you tomorrow, not as a duke courting a debutante, as a man visiting a woman he hopes to know. He left her on the terrace, and Helena remained there looking up at the stars. Hope was a fragile thing, but she felt it stirring nonetheless. Inside the ballroom, the gossips fed on the evening's events. Lady Jersey pronounced it the most diverting thing since Byron's divorce. The Earl of Ashworth stood in a corner, his ambitions thoroughly confounded. Margaret and Catherine, for perhaps the first time, regarded their younger sister with something approaching awe. Julian Croft, who had watched the scene from the card room, raised a glass in silent salute. He had lost, but he had lost to a woman who knew her worth. There were worse fates. Part 7, The Choice Earned. Spring softened into summer. The Duke called on Helena at Ashworth Hall 3 times a week, and each visit was an unassuming affair. They walked the lanes, discussing everything from crop rotation to the new novels circulating in London. He told her of his boyhood, of a stern father and a gentle mother who had died too young. She told him of her own loneliness, the youngest daughter in a house that valued marriage over substance. He did not bring gifts. He did not recite poetry. He showed up consistently and without fanfare, and he listened when she spoke. One afternoon, they encountered Julian Croft on a country lane. The meeting could have been awkward, but Croft smiled and tipped his hat. Your Grace, Miss Helena, a fine day for a walk. Indeed, the Duke said. I hope you are well, Mr. Croft. Well enough. I am to travel north soon. There is an estate in Yorkshire that requires a steward, a fresh start. His gaze lingered on Helena, soft with what might have been regret. I wish you every happiness. And I you, Helena said. She meant it. As they walked on, the Duke was quiet. He is a decent man. He is, but he was not the man for me. And have you decided, the Duke asked, his voice carefully neutral, who the man for you might be? Helena stopped walking. They stood at the edge of a meadow, wildflowers rippling in the breeze. I have decided that I will not marry for duty. I will not marry for escape. If I marry, it will be because I have found someone who sees me, truly sees me, and values what he sees. The Duke turned to her, his dark eyes intent. I see a woman who reads agricultural treatises in dusty libraries, who rides astride when no one is watching, who challenged me in front of the entire ton and then walked away, leaving me to follow. I see a woman who is fierce and guarded and entirely unlike anyone I have ever known, and I see the only woman I want. Helena's breath caught. You said you did not care which daughter you married. I was a fool. I cared from the moment you walked in late, covered in mud, and refused to curtsy prettily. I cared even when I did not want to admit it. She looked at him, the Duke of Warrington, a man of wealth and power and maddening pride, and saw the vulnerability beneath the armor. He had earned it this moment. He had changed, not because she demanded it, but because he had chosen to. "Then ask me properly," she said. "Here now, not as a duke, just as a man." He took her hand. His fingers were steady, but his voice was not. "Helena Ashworth, will you marry me? Not because it is convenient, not because your father approves, because I love you and I will spend the rest of my life earning the privilege of your respect." She smiled, the first true, unguarded smile she had given him. "Yes, I will marry you, because I choose you, not your title, not your wealth, you." He did not sweep her into an embrace. They were in a public lane, and the proprieties still held. But his hand tightened on hers, and the look that passed between them spoke more than any embrace could. The wedding took place in the village church, small and quiet, with only family and a handful of close friends. Margaret served as bridesmaid, her earlier envy melted into genuine gladness. Catherine wept happily. The Earl and Countess, still bewildered by the turn of events, managed to appear suitably proud. Helena wore a gown of deep blue silk, the color of a twilight sky, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers from the meadow where he had proposed. The Duke stood at the altar, his expression one of quiet wonder, as if he could not quite believe his fortune. The reception was held at Warrington Chase. The ballroom that had once witnessed her defiance now hosted her triumph. They danced the first waltz, and this time she did not pull away before the music ended. "I was thinking," he murmured, his lips near her ear, "of that day you walked in late. You looked at me as if I were an interruption." "You were an interruption," she said, smiling. "You still are a very welcome one." He laughed, a genuine sound that drew glances from the guests. The Duke of Warrington, laughing at his own wedding ball, the tongue would talk for weeks. As the evening drew to a close, they stood together on the terrace, looking out over the moonlit gardens. The same stars she had gazed at on a London terrace months ago now hung above their home. "I meant what I said that first day," the Duke said softly. "I said I would marry any daughter the Earl chose, but the Earl did not choose you. You chose me, and that has made all the difference." Helena leaned against him, her hand resting on his heart. "You were a very arrogant nobleman. And you were a very late, very muddy youngest daughter." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank heaven for that." They stayed there, wrapped in the quiet, until the last guests departed and the music faded. The future stretched before them, not a transaction, not a duty, but a partnership forged through challenge and change. She had walked in late, and she had been exactly on time.